All right, good morning, everybody. Nice to see everyone. Jason Croyner from University School of the Lowcountry. This is one of our shared learning opportunities. We're here today with Rigel from the Old Exchange building, and he's been there for about 5 years now, and he's you're sort of the education coordinator, leading groups through. And during this crazy time, it's sad that we can't take advantage, especially during this beautiful spring weather, to see all these wonderful things that exist in our town and all the neat people doing interesting stuff. So we're grateful for the Charleston Area Convention Center Visitors Bureau working together with us and Rigel and the Old Exchange to share a virtual tour live right now of the Old Exchange building. And so Rigel, thank you for sharing your passion for history with us today. And I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much, Jason. So everyone, welcome to the Old Exchange and Provost Dungeon. My name is Rigel. I'm the education coordinator here. It's a funny name. It's kind of like Nigel with an R in front of it instead. That's kind of what I tell people. So the building that I am in right now, it is one of the most historic buildings in the city, if not the entire state. It's the Old Exchange and Provost Dungeon. Now, right now, I'm in the portion of the building that we refer to as the dungeon space. You can see all this brickwork surrounding me here. The building was completed by the year 1771, and all of this is the original brickwork of the building dating back to that time period. So this is around 250-year-old brick that you see around here. Now, before we go into the main portion of what we consider to be the dungeon, I want to take some time to actually talk about, well, how did this building come into existence? Now, what was this building originally used for? In order to do that, I'm going to start off showing you guys this little model that we have down here in the dungeon. This model is a representation of what the city of Charlestown originally looked like about 300 years ago. I'm going to try to zoom in here, get a little bit closer so you guys can see it and whatnot. So this model is taken from an Edwin Crisp map made around the year 1704. Originally, Charlestown started out as a very small walled colonial city. Some of you guys might know that the city of Charlestown was originally established in the year 1670 and placed across the Ashley River that you can see here on the model. Now, with that original location that they established themselves at, the English settlers found that there were a few problems at that original Charlestown landing location that we call today. With that location, they had a few problems, one of the big ones being trade. They wanted Charlestown, the capital of the Carolinas, to be this bustling port of trade. Where they were located west of the river wasn't great for that. And then there was another issue with their neighbors. Basically, because we were an English colony, we had to worry about the French and the Spanish possibly coming to try and kill us. So the city of Charlestown in the year 1680 moved across the Ashley River to the peninsula where the city of Charleston is today. And the city has basically been here ever since. Now you can see on this model, the city of Charlestown really is not that large. It only goes from about Cumberland Street to Water Street, and then from East Bay Street depicted here to Meeting Street. So it's nothing compared to what the city is today. This long stretch of road that you guys see right here, that is the King's Highway. Today that's known as King Street. It's one of the major shopping districts in the city. And over here, this creek that's located just outside the confines of the walled city of Charlestown, that is actually where Market Street is located today. That used to be Daniels Creek, but today that is the city market. And with it raining today, it probably has turned back into a creek. With that being said, so the city of Charlestown was indeed a walled city for our defense. Remember, we have to protect ourselves from threats like the French and the Spanish, possible attacks from hostile Native American tribes and pirates even. So there is a wall surrounding Charlestown to better protect them. The wall consists of an earthen portion facing the mainland out here, And then you have this brick seawall facing the Cooper River. Now, as the city would begin to grow and expand and prosper throughout the centuries, they eventually tore down the wall. They also started to fill in all of this marsh that surrounds them here. They used various filled-in land, dirt from the mainland in order to fill up all this marsh, as well as some garbage and refuse throughout the centuries. But this brick wall that you guys see here, the brick wall was not so easily destroyed. Even though they would tear down the earthen portion of the wall outside, they did not destroy this brick seawall. In fact, this wall technically still exists. It's just buried underneath the city. Now, you guys, I'm going to see if I can zoom in here. So you'll notice that there's this portion of the wall right here, this semicircular section that we call the Half Moon Battery. It looks a little bit different compared to the triangular defense areas right here. That's because this is the central point of defense for the city. The little building that you can see right next to it, that is the old guardhouse of Charlestown. Kind of think of that building as a ye old police station of sorts. It's basically a building where the night watch would lay to rest. So this is the central point of defense for the city right here with this semicircular portion of the wall. Now, with that in mind, I point that out because by the year 1767, that's all gone. By 1771, our building, the Exchange, is built right on top of that Half Moon Battery. So the Exchange building is constructed right on top of that old seawall. And in case you guys don't believe me, we're about to go see that seawall. So I am now going to go ahead and move us into dungeon space. And inside this dungeon, one of the very first things we are going to see is a portion of that old seawall. And I'm actually going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to see if I can try to get a better view of the wall because we have this this lovely moat here where the Half Moon Battery is viewed with these bars around. So let me go ahead and flip the camera back around. So here you can see this moat. The lighting in here is not that great. And right here, you guys can see this brickwork down here. This is indeed a portion of the Half Moon Battery. Now, let me see if I can try and get a little bit of a different angle here so that you guys can see it just a little bit better. Go ahead and tread lightly. All right, so this is a little behind the scenes look at this Half Moon Battery, getting it from a different angle here. So you'll notice with all the other brickwork here, it looks quite old, and this is indeed 250-year-old brickwork. But this brickwork down here is over 300 years old. Camera's not, there it is. So this is indeed a portion of the Half Moon Battery right here, part of the old seawall that used to defend the city of Charlestown over 300 years ago. Now, this wall originally stood at around 15 feet high and 5 feet thick. So if you were standing behind the confines of the Half Moon Battery, say if you were over here where this brick flooring is today, there would be about 5 feet of brick wall coming in from the interior. And then if you are on the outside of the wall, out here, the wall is 15 feet high to you. Now you also notice, looking down below here, that there is water down inside this space. Camera's not working with me. There it is. So notice there's a bunch of water down here. You'll notice that there's a pump inside this space too to pump out some of this water. What you're looking at here is part of the original shoreline of the city of Charlestown. You guys remember on that model how it was basically like right on the shore? Well, we eventually built on top of the Cooper River too. What you're looking at here is part of that filled in land that pushed back the Cooper River. Today, when our building was originally constructed in 1771, our building was right on the shoreline, but today the water is now 2 blocks away from our city. So we've pushed back the shoreline quite a bit, but this is water that comes in straight from the mainland. So this is where the the shoreline for the city should naturally come to rest. Now, with that in mind, this wall was indeed used to defend the city quite some time ago. In fact, if we were here 300 years ago in the summer of 1718, we'd be looking out into the harbor and we would see none other than Blackbeard himself. In the summer of 1718, with a force of 4 ships and 400 men, Blackbeard came to the city of Charlestown and blockaded the port. He held the city for hostage, taking several hostages, and basically this wall was used as a last line of defense to keep the notorious Blackbeard at bay. Unfortunately, we were able to pay Blackbeard a ransom, and once we paid him his ransom, Blackbeard released his hostages safely and unharmed. But this wall down here was indeed used to help defend the city against the likes of Blackbeard himself. Now, with all that in mind, so the building was, well, this wall was originally used to defend the city of Charlestown 300 years ago. As you can see, it's now buried underneath this building. That's because by the year 1767, the external threats that were surrounding Charlestown weren't necessarily as big of an issue anymore. We had the full backing of the King's army supporting us. So the wall eventually came down. The Half Moon Battery and the old guardhouse that used to be here were eventually torn down. And then our building was constructed on top of that location. Our building completed by the year 1771. Now, our building was originally meant to be a customs house for trading goods. You guys can see over here kind of an example of that. This right here is Gus. He is a tax collector within this space. See, when the building first opened in the year 1771, it was meant to be a customs house for trade. So if you were a merchant coming to Charlestown for the very first time, this is the building you would come to in order to sell your wares and make some money. You would see shipments of indigo, rice, major exports of Charlestown being stored in here. Here on display, we have some bags of wild rice here. You would also have other wares coming inside of this space as well. Pottery, furs, things of that nature. Now, when the building was completed in 1771, it was also meant to be a grand statement of the city of Charleston's wealth. I'll kind of show you guys an example of that later on as we make our way back up to the first floor. When the building was originally made, it was meant to show off the wealth of the colony. South Carolina is actually the wealthiest colony for England within North America, and they wanted everyone to know that. So they built a giant 3-story building right on the shore, so it was the very first thing people would see as they came into the city. Now, with that being said, even though this building was meant to show off the wealth and glory of this British Empire, in the year 1776, on the very front steps of our building facing Broad Street, this is where we declared our independence from England. In August of 1776, right on the front steps of the building facing Broad Street, that is where a copy of the Declaration of Independence was read. This is where South Carolina announced that it was going to be a free and independent state, which, as some of you guys might know, the British Empire wasn't too keen on that. So the American Revolution really kicked off from there. During the course of the American Revolution, there would be an extreme pressure on the British to capture the city of Charlestown. They tried to capture the city on 3 separate occasions. They tried once in 1776, and that failed. They tried again in 1779, and that didn't work either. But third time is the charm, unfortunately. And in May of 1780, after the British bombarded the city for several weeks, they captured the city of Charlestown on May 12th, 1780. When this city fell, thousands of patriots surrendered with it, making it the largest military defeat for the patriots during the American Revolution. And when the British took over, they implemented a martial law. They placed many patriots under house arrest. They even created prison ships out in the harbor. And then there were places like this. You see, the British, they saw the exchange building, the wealth and status that it had, and they wanted to kind of change it into a dungeon space, so to speak. Now, originally, when the British took over this building, they didn't call it the dungeon. The British, they called it the Provost. That word basically means a military prison. It comes from a Latin word meaning keeper of men. But if you were an inmate inside of this provost, you would instead be calling it the dungeon, because the conditions in here were so cruel, it felt like a dungeon. You can see these mannequins on display here that kind of show you what conditions inside of this space was like. You'll notice that the majority of the inmates are being held in this area right here, in the centermost section of the dungeon space. The inmates were primarily held where these two large support beams are today, and in between these two doors. So where this emergency exit door is right now and where these wooden doors are behind me right here. This is where they held a majority of their inmates. They did so here because the inmates that were held in this space were especially secluded from the outside world. They had very little contact with the outside. Granted, the two doors that used to exist right out here, these would have been the doors leading straight back out to the main streets. This door heading straight back out to the Cooper River, to the docks, and this door leading straight out to East Bay and Broad Street. But these doors are heavily guarded at all times, so escape is so close yet so far away. Now, looking at these mannequins, you can see that some of them are shackled by their wrists and ankles, and then there are some that are not. That's because sometimes they didn't need to confine the inmates inside of this space due to the horrendous conditions that were in here. You guys will notice the hay that's scattered around their feet. That was the bed for the inmates. So basically, hay is all these people had to sleep on while they're confined in here. And that bed of theirs would attract rats, and those rats would carry diseases like smallpox and yellow fever, things of that nature. Now, so people would get sick and occasionally die in this space because of those diseases. And then there's the food situation, food being said to be so scarce enough to feed a child. So people are starving in this space. They're sick in this space. They're potentially shackled in here. And try to imagine being in this space on a hot summer day in Charleston, surrounded by a bunch of strangers you don't necessarily know. You can kind of imagine why people would call this space a dungeon now. Now, with that in mind, so they did indeed confine patriots inside of the space, but patriots weren't necessarily the only inmates held in here. They would also have held in disorderly redcoats, so soldiers who were disobeying orders or ruffians of sorts were also tossed inside the space along with patriots. So you can imagine some of the fights that were broken out between them here. You would also have other inmates be inside the space like murderers and thieves. So you have some of the worst the city has to offer being imprisoned with brave men and women fighting to create a country free from tyranny. And I did say women as well. You can kind of see here, dungeon's a bit dark, so you probably can't see her too well. But there's a mannequin over here that is of a female inmate. They did indeed imprison women inside of this space along with the men. That's not all. They imprisoned young with the old. They imprisoned white with the black, rich with the poor. It didn't really matter who you were inside of the city. If you were someone who earned the wrath of a redcoat, they imprisoned you within this space. Now, with that being said, the British, while they have control over this space, there is one secret they don't necessarily know about this area. I actually did an education online video that I posted on our Facebook page talking about this in length, and you can actually see me behind this wall here. But this wall contains a secret that the British don't know. You see, before the British captured the city, there's a lot of cannon fire coming into the city of Charlestown. And the Continental Army decided to protect the gunpowder that they had stored at the powder magazine on Cumberland Street and move 7 tons of that gunpowder down here. So they took 7 tons of gunpowder, you can see here, and they buried it within this space. Now, once the gunpowder was buried within this location, they then created this wall around that entire area. So it was completely sealed away from view. Now, the British have control over the building. They're using it as a prison. They're locking people away in here, but not once do they question the not once do they question this wall at all, even though this wall goes against the entire design of the building. The building was constructed in a style of architecture known as Georgian Palladian architecture, where basically everything needs to be big, blocky, and symmetrical. Balance is key with this building's design. So having a giant wall within this space completely threw everything off balance. But the British did not care. They didn't investigate it, which is great, because as we know, the British were not here forever. The British were eventually forced out of Charlestown in December of 1782. And when the British were finally forced out of the city, we were able to reclaim the gunpowder that was down below here, and we got back 5 tons of gunpowder that was buried down below. That was a huge victory for the Patriot cause. Now, with all that being said, so we've talked a lot about this dungeon here. Again, seeing the brickwork all around. Now, we are going to make our way upstairs. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the more delicate history of the city, or not delicate, but more refined history in a sense. Let me also, while I'm here, show you guys the panel right here. This shows you what the Exchange Building originally looked like when it was completed around 1771. So here you can see the ships out in the Cooper River. You can see how large this is. The building is massive compared to everything else on the shoreline. So it really is a grand statement of the city of Charleston's at this point in time. Now, some of you might be wondering, how did South Carolina become the wealthiest colony at this point? Well, that was due to 2 contributing factors. One of those factors was the trade goods that South Carolina was. Those were our primary cash crops at this point in time. And then you also have to keep in mind that these cash crops are being grown on plantations. And those plantations are heavily using slave labor. Slavery had been a part of Charlestown since the very beginnings of the colony. And to give you guys an idea of just how large the institution of slavery was here in South Carolina, by the year 1770, that's around the time we're the wealthiest colony for England. By the year 1770, the population of Charlestown was around 12,000 people. The majority of the people here, over 6,000 of them, were in fact enslaved African Americans, all of them working on plantations or working within the city doing different jobs and whatnot. So that's where all of our wealth is really coming from. That's how we became the wealthiest colony by the year 1770, through the success of cultivating cash crops like rice and indigo, and the ways of using slave labor to produce all those cash crops. Now we're making our way upstairs into the Great Hall. So I'm gonna go ahead, flip the camera around so you guys can see. So this right here, this is the Great Hall of the Old Exchange. Now, let me talk a little bit about what this room would have been used for. You see, in 1771, when the building was completed to be a customs house, all of the trading, the wheeling and dealing, that would have taken place on the first floor of the building. Then the dungeon that we were in down below, that was originally used as a storage area to hold goods that were temporarily being traded upstairs. Now, this room, though, this grand, magnanimous room was used as a ballroom for social entertainment. Customs houses back in the day were used as social centers as well as places of business. So there's this grand ballroom for people to have parties for the well-to-do to be luxuriously entertained in. This is where main grand banquets, parties, dances, things of that nature would take place. Now, with that in mind, you can also see more examples of this building architecture on display here. Columns, again, aligning with Georgian Palladian sensibilities. Like I said, if it's Georgian Palladian, it needs to be big, blocky, and symmetrical. Symmetry is key with this building's design. In fact, you can see 2 fireplaces in this room, one on the left and one on the right. Do they need 2 fireplaces in a single room? No. But they had 2 fireplaces in this room to maintain the absolute perfect symmetry within this space. Now, with this space being used as a ballroom, there would indeed be quite a few parties held within this space. But during the course of the American Revolution, this actually became a very important public assembly hall for the patriot cause. In fact, in this room in 1774, this is where South Carolina elected its delegates for the Continental Congress. And as we know, during the Second Continental Congress in 1776, that is when the Declaration of Independence was signed. 4 of the men who signed the Declaration of Independence were from South Carolina, and they were basically chosen to do that task here in this room. I actually have right here these little cutout portraits of these 4 men that we normally have display up here for you guys to see. I'm going to go over who each one of these guys are. This fellow right over here, this is Edward Rutledge. Edward Rutledge was a famous lawyer within the city of Charlestown, and he was actually the youngest person to sign the Declaration of Independence. He was around 26 years old when he signed it. Then you have this man right here who, based on this portrait, kind of looks like he should have been wearing his powdered wig. This is Thomas Hayward Jr. He was a famous judge within our city, and his home is actually another famous historic site within the city of Charlestown known as the Hayward Washington House today. Then over here you have Arthur Middleton. He was the son of famous plantation owner Henry Middleton, as well as a legal scholar within the city. His last name is quite famous. In fact, you might recognize it with places like Middleton Plantation, things like that. And then this fellow over here, he's a bit of an unfortunate case. His name's Thomas Lynch Jr. Now, Thomas Lynch Jr. wasn't the original delegate chosen to represent South Carolina for the Continental Congress. His father, Thomas Lynch Sr., was. Thomas Lynch Sr. being a famous statesman within our city. But Thomas Lynch Sr. Suffered a stroke in 1776, and so his son, Thomas Lynch Jr., had to step in and take his father's place. Now, it's said when these men signed the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Lynch Jr. left a blank space on the Declaration for his father to sign if he ever recovered. But unfortunately, Thomas Lynch Sr. never did, and he shortly after passed away. But these are the 4 men from South Carolina who basically ended up signing the Declaration of Independence. Also, on the back of these portraits, you can see the signatures that they left behind that are on the Declaration. So here you see Edward Rutledge's signature, the back of this one. You can see Thomas Hayward Jr. Back at this one, you can see Arthur Middleton. Back at this one, Thomas Lynch Jr. right here. Now, a few other important things to discuss with this room. Because the Declaration of Independence is not the only important document that has ties to this space, After the American Revolution happened, this room would be used for South Carolina's Constitutional Convention. So basically in the Great Hall, this is where South Carolina debated whether or not they wanted to join the United States of America and ratify this document right here, the United States Constitution. Now, the Constitution was an extremely controversial document at the time. That's kind of a bold statement to make, especially in today's time. You know, with our perspective, we adore and love the Constitution, but back then, especially here in South Carolina, there were many people who were not for this Constitution. They were not for this strong federal government. However, in the Great Hall, inside of this room, this is where 149 men said aye, whereas only 72 said nay. With that, South Carolina became the 8th state within the United States of America. So this room right here is where South Carolina became the 8th state and ratified the U.S. Constitution. We are one of 4 buildings left in the entire country where the Constitution was ratified in. And then finally, I did talk about this space being used as a ballroom. I haven't really talked about too many of the parties that happened here though. Well, there's actually one famous guest who did party quite a bit inside of this space, that man being this fellow right here, George Washington. Talked a little bit about George Washington being entertained at the old Exchange building with another education online video that I posted. I believe that was sometime last week or so, or actually no, it was 2 weeks ago now that I think about it. But George Washington was luxuriously entertained inside of this space. This building is where George Washington danced, where he dined, and it's even where he watched a concert with the St. Cecilia Opera Society. So this room was used not only to ratify the Constitution, but it's where the first president of the United States himself was entertained. When the president was here, there would have been floral garlands along all of these columns here and signs praising the president on all of the walls too. And this space would be absolutely packed with people. There would be a ton of people inside the space. The one concert of the St. Cecilia Opera Society, George Washington said there were over 400 women in attendance for that concert. So you just try to imagine 400 people inside of one space. This room does look quite large, but I can guarantee you we cannot fit 400 people inside of this room. Now, with all that in mind, there's one last thing I want to share with you guys. I talked a little bit about this in the previous education online video that I shared on Monday. It's the story of this guy right here, the Colonel Isaac Hayne. Isaac Hayne was a strong advocate for the patriot cause, served as a colonel during the American Revolution, and was a owner of a plantation here in South Carolina. This room that I'm in inside the Great Hall is actually called the Isaac Hayne Room, named after him, because Isaac Hayne was one of the few men to be publicly executed when the British had control over the city of Charlestown. And this room that I'm in right here, this is the room that Isaac Hayne stayed in for the final 24 hours of his life before this execution took place. So this room is where Isaac Hayne stayed in for the final moments before his death, with the only furniture being allowed in here being a coffin right by this chair and window here. Where this is today, instead Isaac Hayne's coffin would be in here, and that's where he stayed for the final few days before his execution. But I'd like to remind people about this. I'd like to end my big tours of this building inside this space, mainly because in that room, inside of this great hall over here, we talk about many of the celebrations involving this country. This is where we chose our delegates to sign the Declaration. This is where we ratified the Constitution. This is where George Washington partied. But none of the celebrations in here would have been made possible if it weren't for guys like Isaac Hayne here, who were willing to lay down their life in support of a cause for freedom. So with that in mind, guys, this concludes a lot of the major content that I wanted to share with you. I think we've ended up wrapping up a little bit early. It's a couple minutes before 40 minutes now. But if you guys want, we can go ahead and start a Q&A session here in the Great Hall space. Not sure, let's see, not sure where to take it from there. Are you there still, Jason?
Yeah, Rigel. So do you, is it easier if they write out their questions in the chat box, or do you want me to, you know, sort of pick one person at a time?
Let me see here. Let me see if I can access the chat box. I am kind of new to Zoom.
Yeah,
learning.
We'll just do questions then.
Okay, yeah, that works. We'll do questions here. Let me go ahead and move this chair over here, get myself situated at this table here so I can better answer any questions. All right, here we go. That should work. That should do just fine. All right, so what are a couple questions some of you guys might have?
All right, so I would just say if you could raise your hand or use the participant question thing. Grady?
What was the, how would they execute people?
They would primarily execute people by hanging them. That's what happened with Isaac Hayne in particular. He was hanged out on the streets for all to see. And that punishment was primarily used for traitors. So with Isaac Hayne, they considered him to be a traitor to the British. Isaac Hayne was basically forced to sign an oath of allegiance, swearing his loyalty to the English in regards that they would protect his land. But the British failed to protect his land, so he began to fight against the British once again, only to be captured during a skirmish. And so because Isaac Hayne signed that oath of allegiance, they considered him to be a traitor to the crown and hanged him as a traitor. Other people have also been executed through firing squads as well too, but hanging was what they would do with traitors in particular. So.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. I think I see another hand up over there with Amelia. I don't see your mic on. There we go.
There you go, Amelia.
Sorry. So I've heard a lot of stories of like people that work there now, like having some kind of spooky experiences like down in the dungeon area. And I'm really interested in that kind of thing. Have you had any like experiences? And if not, like what's the best story you've heard and do you believe in it and blah, blah.
That is a very good question. So like Jason was saying, I've been working at this building for about 5 years now. And let me just go ahead and say that, no, I'm not going to try to convince you whether or not ghosts are real. If you believe in ghosts or not, that's entirely up to you. Me personally, working in this building as long as I have, yeah, no, I've encountered a few creepy things that I can't really explain away. You will often hear about staff members seeing chains in the dungeon start to shake on their own. I've seen that happen twice. And then one time I was actually getting changed because believe it or not, this attire that I'm wearing isn't my everyday attire. I don't wear this every day. We actually have a changing room down in the dungeon space. I was getting changed in there one morning. I was basically the only person inside of the building. And I heard footsteps walk up to the door and then walk away. And so I quickly looked to see who it was, and there was no one there. So that's one paranormal experience that I've encountered. I haven't really been able to explain what happened with that, so. I can't hear you, the mic went muted again.
The mannequins.
Oh yeah, those mannequins.
If they start moving, I'm out.
Yeah, no, it's same here. All right, let's see, does anyone else have a few questions? I'm going to scroll along with my screen here, see. Jason, do you know if anyone has any questions? See a lot of blank screens.
Yeah, I got Liam.
Oh, we got Liam. Okay, here.
What made you want to have this job?
What made me want to have this job?
Yes.
That's a very good question. I basically have been a lover of history, like, since I was around you guys' age. I've always had a passion and an interest for it. Went to college for it, and I started working at this building as an intern about 5 years ago, and eventually made my way up to being the education person. So I've always had an interest in history. American Revolution especially has always been an interest of mine too since I was younger. So yeah, it's just been a passion and something I've always wanted to do for a long time. So. Yeah. Who else? Who else do we have, Jason?
Jack Woodward, please.
Jack, hello? Oh, I can see you talking, Jack, but I can't hear you. I still can't hear you, man. I don't know what's up. It doesn't say that you're muted.
Jack, see if you can sort that out while we'll come to someone else. Anyone else have a question for Rigel? Grady, go for it.
So my friend's dad does like ghost tours, and he mentioned a dungeon near there. Do you know, does Bulldog Tours do anything down there?
Yes. So Bulldog Tours, they're actually the ghost tour company that gives tours inside of the dungeon space at night. Yeah, they're the company that actually goes inside of the dungeon space and gives tours of that dungeon. So yeah, they're the company that primarily does it. Actually, I used to work with Bulldog Tours, be a walking tour guide myself before I became the education person here. And I've been inside of that space at night plenty of times, and yeah, it's pretty creepy at night. Like during the day, it's already so dark, and then you go in there and it's pitch black, and yeah, you just want to get out of there.
Jack, you want to try again?
Yeah, I still can't hear you, Jack. I don't know what's up with that.
All right, I'm going to go to Charlie. We'll get one more question. Charlie, you had your hand up?
I was just curious. What do you think the worst living condition was in the Provost dungeon?
Well, when I was talking about the living conditions down there, it's kind of a cultivation of all of it happening. Like you could have someone sick with smallpox in one corner, you could have someone starving, you could be feeling all three at the same time. There are other stories that I've heard of people being inside of that space with very little food and like rainwater coming in from the outside because they didn't have glass on those windows. It was originally just metal bars, so you get some water coming in and people just being stuck in puddles near some of the windows if they weren't being held in that central location. Though I will say that the dungeon space, sometimes some people consider that to be a reprieve from some cruel conditions, because the prison ships that were out in the harbor, those were supposedly even worse than being held inside of the dungeons at sometimes. Like, I've heard some stories about people from the prison ships actually being removed from the prison ships and imprisoned in the dungeon as a bit of a relief. So there are definitely cruelties going on abound there. And you also have to keep in mind too, you have like inmates like murderers and thieves being locked away with patriots. You have violent redcoats who were disorderly, not following orders, being in there with patriots as well too. So you can imagine potential fist fights breaking out between those inmates too. Yeah, no, I can't really list like one specific thing that was horrible, because it's kind of a combination of all those things at once. Though I will say, I don't think smallpox would be a fun thing to have.
Rigel, I want to thank you for today. This was really amazing, and you jumped right in, and it looks like you've done this a million times, but I know you haven't, you know, walking around with your phone and sharing this. And I felt like I was there, and I've done this before a couple times. It was really nice. And our students, and I know that the greater community is really grateful for your making this special opportunity possible for us to see inside. And we can't wait for COVID-19 and all that stuff to ease off so we can come visit again and see you in action in person. And so thanks to you, Gold Exchange, and the Provost, and the Convention Center and Visitors Bureau. We're just grateful for today. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Jason. Yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity. Yeah, ever since this whole pandemic has come down, our building's been closed to the public for about a month now. We're hoping to get back open as soon as we can, but our priority is the safety of the community. But I'm so glad and thankful to get this opportunity. It's been so long getting to interact with students and, you know, show around the building like this. So yeah, thank you guys so much for letting me do this. It's been a while. It's quite refreshing because, like I said, it's been like a month since I've given one of these programs now. So.
Well, you're a pro, and it was really great. And thank you, everyone who attended today. We'll end up, this is being recorded. We'll end up posting it the next day or so too to share. And Rigel, many thanks. It was a great time.
Yep, thank you, sir.
All right, everybody. We'll see you later. We have another session at 11, which is the Turtle program for SCD&R, and we have some more this week. And have a great time. We'll see everybody soon. Goodbye. Bye, Rigel.
Take care, guys.